And what we've seen this session, I tell folks, I've been doing this work for years, and I tell folks that bail reform, our efforts around pretrial reform, this session has probably been the hardest issue that I've ever worked on in my life.
This is Taya reporting for the Real News Network in Annapolis, Maryland. We're here at the state capitol where we have breaking news. The Congressional Black Caucus has just voted against bail reform bill SB 983, a bill sponsored by the bail industry. Here to discuss the implications of this is investigative reporter Janis. Now, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about this bail reform bill SB 983?
Well, this bill, it's not a bail reform bill. Basically, it's a bill that would basically undo a recent ruling by the Maryland Court of Appeals, which said that judges should use discretion, and when a indigent person or a person who can't afford bail, there should be no bail. It basically it would really curtail the use of cash bail, especially with poor people in the state, which has been a big issue, a big justice reform issue. This bill would have undone this and sort of put us back in the whole money bail situation. So the Black Caucus coming out against it is a big statement because it's already gone through the Senate. So it looks like it's very possible they can undo some of the progress that has already been made.
So what are the next steps for the Black Caucus? This bill still has some life in it.
Well, the Black Caucus is really just saying they don't want this to go forward, but the bill has passed the Senate, is in the Rules Committee, and once the Rules Committee works out, it could still come out of committee and end up getting voted on the floor. So really, there's going to be a lot of lobbying, a lot of pushing by advocates, some of who we talk to and we will hear from later, who say that this is not over, this is a good step, but it's quite possible this bill could still go forward.
Well, one of the advocates mentioned that there was also profit motive in the act of having legislators vote for this non-bail reform bill. Isn't there some profit motive there?
Well, yeah, I mean, the two committee chairmen of the committees that actually hear these bills, Bob Zirkin, who heads the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Joseph Valerio, who runs the House Judiciary Committee, the two committees which these bills go through, got roughly 11 to 12% of their entire cash from the bail industry. So no doubt that the money at stake. But, when you look at it relatively speaking, I mean, we talked to Professor Doug Colbert from the University of Maryland, who said it's basically a $100 million industry in Maryland. So the money that, $100,000 went to Bobby Zirkin or whatever the number is so relatively small compared to the profits that people are making. So let's go to our interviews and let's see what people had to say about this.
Right. The Maryland Legislative Black Caucus just voted by a 31-5 margin to allow the Court of Appeals rule to stand and take effect, and to kill Senate Bill 983, which was, quote unquote, the bail bondsman's bill. The court rule will stand for the rest of the year, and then if we come back next year and there needs to be changes, we can do that then.
Do you think that that's the end of this at this point for this session? Or, I mean, because, sometimes people ignore the caucus.
People never ignore the caucus. No, with a statement this strong, I think that's the end of the issue, yes.
What do you think is going to happen? We're waiting to hear what happens with this bill for bail reform, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I'm hopeful that the court rule will go into effect. It's going to have very positive development in a number of different ways. I mean, first of all, there'll be fewer people held in jail because they're poor. Second, I think you'll see better results, better public safety, more people showing up for trial. And the legislature ought to give that rule an opportunity to go into effect. Let's see how it works. They'll be back here next year. If it's not working, they can fix it.
Well, now, you came out very early on in this issue saying that bail was possibly unconstitutional. Have you been surprised about the pushback? I mean, the bail industry seems to have a lot of power.
They do have a lot of power, we identified, and others have identified, a very serious problem, namely that people are held in jail for one single reason: they're poor, period. The court rule fixes that. And regardless of the power of any industry, the power of justice is great. I think that the General Assembly gets the message, and I'm hopeful they'll let the court rule go into effect.
I mean, we've had a report that bail is unconstitutional. We all know that how the issue has been sort of gotten a lot of support into this reform. Are you surprised about how hard it's been in terms of how persistent the bail industry has been in trying to get rid of this ruling by the Court of Appeals?
I'm not surprised, but it's actually been a very enlightening experience as to the extent to which money and resources can influence a process so much that something that for many folks is essentially a no-brainer can be so controversial.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, really, it seemed like a no-brainer, but it ended up being down to the wire. Going forward, what are your concerns? I mean, do you think the Court of Appeals ruling goes far enough, or does more need to be done?
Well, I think definitely more needs to be done, particularly in the area of pretrial release. We need to really look at investing in robust pretrial services so we have a large array of alternatives to detention. Because what we don't want is we don't want a situation where folks are being detained just because there aren't alternatives.
It was pretty forcefully voted to stop this bill. Do you think that's the end of this story?
No. It is not.
And why not?
Because anything can happen in Annapolis. We have, less than 2 weeks left of session. While this sent a very strong message, the very strong racial justice argument that's been upheld in terms of the whole bail reform effort, the idea that the majority of individuals that are impacted are poor people of color, poor black men and women. It's great that the Black Caucus finally, very forcefully, took a position of opposition to this bill that would, perpetuate the current system. However, like I said, anything can happen in Annapolis. There are a number of steps that could still take effect, a number of options and interventions that could ultimately effectively revive this bill. So while the Black Caucus has, voted to oppose it, we're hoping that the Speaker will take that into account and, use that as an opportunity to say we should not, the Black Caucus is saying we shouldn't move this forward. It would hurt, it would continue to hurt poor black and brown folk. We hope he would take that into account, but, you still have the actual House Rules Committee in which the bill is sitting. And so there is still an opportunity for the bill to come up for a vote in the Rules Committee, and then for it to be moved out of the Rules Committee and then head to the House Judiciary Committee, where we know is chaired by House Chairman Joe Valerio, who is very adamantly in support of Senate Bill 983. So it's not over. This is a great first big step in a number of steps that, could potentially lead to the demise of Senate Bill 983, but it ain't over. But using the example of the Women's Caucus or even something like the Latino Caucus, there are certain initiatives where they take very strong positions of either support or opposition on particular pieces of legislation. And those caucuses are giving courtesies. Just like if there's a particular piece of legislation that has a specific impact on a certain jurisdiction, those jurisdictions are giving local courtesy. And then the committees and the necessary powers that be give, deference to those entities and those courtesies. And so using that same context and applying it to the Black Caucus in this instance, we would hope that given that when it comes to bail reform and when it comes to our pretrial system, we're very clear about the fact that this disproportionately impacts people of color, poor people of color. And so if the Black Caucus, whose constituencies very clearly directly represent people of color, and they're saying this bill, Senate Bill 983, does nothing to help people of color, actually, it doesn't even just perpetuate the system, it actually takes us a step back, then I would hope that the Speaker and the House leadership would take that into account and respect the vote of the Black Caucus.
This is Taya and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Annapolis, Maryland.